My humble respect to Guru Mahan, Guru Piran Sivasankaran, Guru Piranyo, fellow Jnanis. Today I'm going to talk on a topic that is been of interest to many people, and this is related to chapter 18 of Mahan's teachings on birth, rebirth, reincarnation. We covered different frameworks to try to explain, birth, rebirth, reincarnation. We saw, earlier discussion about all of us possess both the gross body and also the subtle body. But today I'm going to take you a little bit more deeper in the idea of what this reincarnation is. So let's, do a thought experiment, right? So it's always good whenever we take this path of spirituality, we have to introspect, contemplate, reflect, and meditate deeply on the various ideas, concepts. And then when we meditate upon this, we get greater clarity. So there is no place for dogmatic belief system so we've got to think logically. As I said, the spiritual compass guides us. We have one hand, the religious understanding of birth and rebirth in a comprehensive way, but we also have the kind of a very scientific way, but anchoring on both logic and also, the self-realization path, or realizing the path using logic and also scientific approach, a very systematic way. So I'm going to take you through the systematic understanding of this whole process of birth, rebirth, reincarnation, the various questions people ask. How is it that, we are not aware of our previous life or the future life? And it's written in the scriptures that, in some books, there's past life, future life. How is it that, we don't have memories of our past life, but some people seem to have memories of past life? There are also questions, how is it that the Mahans know about the past and the future? How is it that they're able to be transcendental? So all these questions come back to this, who are we, as a being? Are we born? Is there rebirth? Are there death? What does death mean? We covered many of these concepts in the last few satsangs. But I want to take you a little bit more deeper in this understanding. So let's do a thought experiment, right? So the thought experiment is as follows: like what a scientist is, or what a, using logical reasoning. So let's do some kind of things that our mind can understand this very complex idea of reincarnation. So let's bring it down to a model, try to understand this, right? So if we understand in the model framework, then we'll try to generalize it. So it's a thought experiment, and I'm going to say, okay, it's difficult to visualize the spirit or visualize this thing, so because we're using our material apparatus. But having used the material apparatus, so we have to make certain assumptions, and let's use the assumptions and then start generalizing it. So assume this screen, this white screen, is actually formless, dimensionless, and all those things. So let's call that as, that base substratum, nothing there, no form. I put the infinity sign there to say that our assumption of this white space is actually formless, dimensionless, and all the information of the infinite possibilities and potentialities is embedded in this continuum. So, assume there's nothing there, no thing, this is potential for achieving, potential for that infinite possibilities and, potentialities. And then we see that evidence shows that our birth of our universe is about 13.8 billion years. Now, this is infinite possibilities, infinite potentialities, dimensionless. You can say infinite dimensions if you want to call it formless, dimensionless. And we saw in the early parts of the satsangs, in the earlier versions of the satsang, we said, okay, our universe has been dated to be about 13.8 billion years. And that universe is 3D, means three-dimensional space, and we have time. So the moment we have time, then we have a continuum like this, right? So beginning right up to, it's going on. And in that continuum, all the information of evolution is embedded in this continuum. So one hand, we have that before this, we have that white screen or the formless where infinite possibilities of potentialities are embedded. And because of its infinite possibilities and potentialities, we see that our universe, our universe commenced 13.8 billion years, and the three-dimensional plus time began. And we know that all the basic elements and everything until more complex beings were created. Right? So we know this story, but all this is embedded in that evolution. So from the basic building blocks to more complex building blocks for oxygen and all those things into more complex beings, all that is information is embedded in there, in the molecules and the electrons and the protons. And then eventually we have more complex beings, that is sentient beings that have consciousness. And then that's passed on, and we saw that evolution of all the species, including we human beings. And that information is embedded in us. And we see that through the process of procreation, the next generation comes, and our body, our whole biology is carried through our DNA, where all the information is embedded. So whatever information is embedded in that DNA will realize the type of biological beings we are, and so on, the plants to animals to bacteria to viruses and so on. So this continuum has all this embedded information. So a tiger will give birth to a tiger. A rambutan tree will give rise to a rambutan tree. So we know that, and of course you can do cross-pollination, but nevertheless, you have a mixture of the DNAs that will give you, maybe new breed of rambutan or, and other species. So nevertheless, it is embedded in this continuum, this black line here, that information is embedded. And there is a time. So you see the time is linear, right? So, but what we then have is that now I'm going to introduce human beings. So assume that the human beings are now that time period that is there. And this human being is connected to the continuum, because after all that information, the consciousness is what powers this human being. So an ordinary human being has a frequency, and that frequency starts with from the fetus right up to the human consciousness until they mature, and then of course it starts diminishing. But nevertheless, there is a kind of a continuum that they operate under, that they can sense, they can think. So there's a frequency in this universe. So everything, this universe has frequency or resonance. And the human beings have a particular, state of consciousness or field of experience. And that field of experience gives us our human personality. It is limited. There are certain frequencies that we cannot hear or we cannot recognize. So we are connected to this infinite possibilities or realities, but with a limited frequency. A bat may have a different frequency. A cow may have a different frequency. A plant may have a different frequency. So all of them have different frequencies, right? So what is the true reality? So we human beings have a particular frequency, and we say this is what our reality is. But you see that, different human beings have different fields of experiences and reality. Some are wider and others are more narrower. It depends on how well we utilize our mind to expand our state of consciousness. But nevertheless, we have a limited frequency, and we see the world in that way. And all this is because we are plugged into that infinite. It's like a fan that is plugged into electricity that is formless, but the fan has its own DNA and characteristics. A bulb would have a particular frequency and a DNA, but it's nevertheless plugged into the electricity, and so on. So we see that we human beings, this Homo sapiens or any other biological beings, are plugged into this continuum that is infinite, but it's linear. So what is the true reality? So our reality may be very different from other people's reality depending on the frequency of our experience, right? So the question great saints and sages ask is, what is the true reality? So we know that our reality is tied to our biology, our apparatus, our senses, all those things, and our learnings and all those things. So we see that, the frequencies varies, but what is the truth, right? And this is how great saints and sages say, as long as I'm caught up with our material body and material experiences and senses, it has limited frequency because that's the nature of that material world. Everything has got limitations. So if we rely on our consciousness based on our material apparatus, eyes, ears, nose, all those things, then we see that our frequency becomes, our mind becomes so anchored on that limited field of experiences. Our mind also has that limitedness, right? So great saints and sages say, that while we are, and you've seen this picture here, that the ocean is very wide, so that line is infinite, but the water in the glass has got a limited field of experience within the glass, even though the DNA of the water is infinite, but because it's in the glass, it takes the reality of the glass. In that same way, the human field of experience in its essence is infinite because it's connected to the infinite, but because of the biology of the body, has got limited experience. And because the mind is so caught up with that limited experience, the mind thinks that is what it's the personality. And we saw this example where the water in the glass looks limited, but the essence is the same as the ocean water. But when we throw the water in the ocean, it goes back to its original form. So what great saints and sages have done is through this process of deductive reasoning, they say, well, if this is what I see in the glass and the ocean, the relationship, then the glass or the vessel that I have also is giving me a limited experience, but my consciousness is unlimited like the water. And this is the kind of reasoning that the Mahans take. So how do I step out? How does the water step out of the glass? Or how do I step out, the consciousness stepping out of the body so that it experiences a wider field of experience? And this is where, you see, this is what now is, the Mahans said, okay, how do we step away from that material senses so that the mind goes back to its original state of existence? How does the water step away from the glass so that it returns back to the ocean? And this is where the great Mahans and others devise techniques for us to step back from our material senses. This is the process of yoga, to be in union with that infinite field. What that means is that we have to step back from our material field of experience. The more quieter our material field of experience, the more awakened we become to a broader or wider sense of experience. So we see that our fixed personality becomes more and more porous. So we see that glimpses of our experience touches that infinite continuum. And that is why when people are meditating, they say, I don't feel that material reality. I get glimpses of that nirvana, glimpses of that infiniteness, glimpses of God. So this happens because our material identity becomes more and more porous. As you become more and more porous, we see that our limited state of consciousness seeps out and becomes more wider. Our frequency now expands a little bit, right? And this process continues. And you see that most people who are practicing say, yeah, I suddenly don't feel the body. I get glimpses of this nirvana feeling or that glimpses of moksha or enlightenment. And this happens because now you're stepping away from all the material consciousness and the mind is slowly becoming more and more silent. There's a sense of quietude, a sense of clarity, And then we start seeing that our material reality starts changing from the material to more porous materiality. And ultimately, you see that that material reality completely dissolves. And we see that our horizon now, at this state, you are like a Mahan, your material identity completely disappears and your field of experience expands. So this happens in the deeper meditation. For those who are experts in this, they experience this a longer period of time. The earlier one is just glimpses, and this is in the early stages of meditation. And as you deepen your meditation, you see that the material identity completely dissolves and you get a wider field of experience. So what happens here? Now, this is something very interesting. You see that the mind that has been gravitated to the limitedness become now more and more infinite. And the body completely is quiet, or the vibrations of the body completely is silenced, right? Very interestingly, now, you see, the question I want to come back is that, so we get that glimpses of experience. The question then is that we have the whole continuum of experience. So a Mahan will know, hey, I am not the material body. I am actually the entire continuum. I am not the drop in the ocean. The ocean is a drop in me, right? So you start getting that experiences. But nevertheless, sometimes you see that, you see in writings of Mahans and writings of great saints and sages, hey, I was there in the past, I am there now, I am there in the future. You read all the great saints and sages who have attained that expanded consciousness, they say, I am everywhere. How is this possible, right? The whole idea is that you are here now, but remember that you're no more tied up by the material identity of the nowness that gives you now, but now it becomes more porous, that your identity becomes more wider, and you can experience a wider field of that time dimension. And so you see that everything that has been connected in the past, the information is embedded into that continuum. And you see that when you touch that continuum, you see that the memories of the past you can experience. This is the memories of the ancestors and memories of the evolution and memories of all those when you are in both as a sentient and insentient being. You get the field of, electromagnetic field. That's the basic building blocks when the elements were there. And slowly, slowly, you start getting, the feeling of all that has come through this continuum in the past, because you're touching on the wire or the electricity that has been part of that full continuum. Because for ordinary human beings, you're only touching a limited field of that experience. So you get a limited period. But for great saints and sages, that field completely dissolves. You get an infinite time field, or that infinite field. You're touching at a field where the experiences were embedded in the past, and you can actually experience that. And you say, hey, I was there, I am there now, and what about the future, right? So this is where you see that sometimes Mahans will say, hey, I was this and I was that. What does that mean? That information was embedded then. The field of bodily field experiences was experienced, and that information is embedded into the continuum. I am here now, and I can sense that vibration or that experience then. So they start transcending time and space, you see, because that material reality now changes to, becoming more and more porous, and eventually, that disappears. So the memories of the past are there, and you can see this in Mahan's works in the later on when he say that, I saw this, people saw me as a guru in the past, and that truly happened, right? And so on. He says, someone drew about me in the past, and when I go there, I see a picture of me. So What that is actually that information in the past is embedded in the continuum, and the Mahans are tapping into it, right? And so they have the full memory of that continuous evolution. And you also see that these great saints and sages are not only looking at the past, but they also know what the future is, because they're touching that core that is transcendental to time. So sometimes the Mahans and the great saints will say that, actually, they know there are things that are going to happen, and they will take precautions, or they will address that. They are aware of it now, and are very strategic in addressing or putting in strategies to sometimes overcome those challenges. And I've also seen sometimes that great saints who tell their disciples, actually, don't do this, because the disciple may not know what the outcome is. The guru knows the outcome is going to be. And I've seen this in even Mahan's case, when he told the disciple, you should not go to this place because it's going to be, something is going to happen to you. And the disciple decided to ignore and go. And true enough, within half an hour, he had an accident. So how is this Mahans able to do this? Because of by touching this core, what is the future for others? It is the present for them. Listen to my words very carefully. What is the future for an ordinary person? It is the present for the Mahan. What is the past that we cannot experience? Is the present for the Mahans, because they transcend space and time. How is that possible? Because the mind now evolves from that material identity to the spiritual identity, which is essentially touching that continuum. That is why Swamiji said, Unarvu Gavanipa, anchor your mind onto that dark line that is running, that vibration that is continuously there. So we see this, and those who are practicing this for a long time will actually get these glimpses of experience. And this is where you see that you become more and more careful, more and more conscious, more and more conscientious of whatever you think, whatever you do, and whatever you speak, because it reverberates across that continuum. So the interesting thing is that you're touching that core. And as you go deeper in your meditation, even that continuum that defines our universe also disappears. So you see that what was caught up in the time dimensions, which is flowing through, although you transcend the time, ultimately, as you go deeper, even that our universal identity that signify our space-time continuum also disappears. And this is what the state of oneness is, right? One with that. You become one with that Aham Brahmasmi. So you now, space and time completely is dissolved. Earlier, you have the space and time. You can, experience past and the present. For a great Mahan, even that disappears, right? Even that falls in to that space, the white space that I talked about, that infinite possibilities and potentialities, and you become one with that. This is what deeper meditation takes you, that even the space-time disappears, right? And the question that we want to ask is that, and you see in the, many scriptures, and, when one practices this, hey, that's true, the body dies. The body, even the dying process of the body is actually going back to its original state, samadhi. So the dying, birth, sustenance, and dying is a change of that form, from the basic building blocks, it, come together as a body, and then it's dissolved. So the changes is what we see as form changes, as what we call birth, death. But the essential components of the body is still in its original state. So even the body transformation in its original state is samadhi state. So what dies? Even the body itself doesn't end in the way that we are thinking about. The end is actually changes in the form, right? But the spirit itself, which is touching that core, is transcendental to time. So we know that now that, the body itself goes back to its basic element. The spirit is not touched by space and time, but yet it enables the body to be connected to it. That gives its consciousness. So we see that this is what we experience, as we do deeper meditation. As we go deeper, we see that even that continuum disappears. We become one with that. Nevertheless, we still have that material identity that is connected to that space, that white space or the transcendental state. But, and this is where Mahan said, don't worry about the body, you are that Atman, you are that oneness. So what is reincarnation then? Think about it very carefully. So we say that the body changes form. So is the reincarnation the form that is changing? If that's what it is, then it's the bodily form that is changing, but the basic element is still the same, right? The spirit we know is transcendental to that form. It is powering the form, but it is not the form. And the interesting thing is that actually that spirit is not caught up by time. Time doesn't impact it. And we saw this in this thought process, that it is connected, but if the mind is fixed on the body, which has got that time continuum that changes, then the mind gets caught up there. If the mind has glimpses of touching beyond that field, it gets it experiences a broader frequency that is slowly becomes transcendental to the material identity. And when it touches that full continuum, it sees that it becomes transcendental to the time. And ultimately, even the time disappears. And we experience this. Actually, all of us experience this in deep sleep. In the deep sleep state, the entire continuum of our field of material experience disappears. We are actually now floating in that state of transcendentality, exactly like this being here, just sustaining in that space that is, transcendental space and time, or you can't even say space, is a substratum, right? So time is not there. And that is what one with that means. So if there's no time, where is the birth and the death? What do we mean by reincarnation? Reincarnation needs time. But I am saying that the true being is transcendental to time. So what do we mean by reincarnation then? So actually, we see that when time is not there, we are eternal. This whole idea of birth, death, all this reincarnation from past life, all this is an illusion. As we go deeper and deeper, we see that we are in the connected state. You become transcendental to time. When you become transcendental to time, the eternal component, we are omnipresent. Omnipresent means that that is the true reality of the unchanging substratum. And this is what, when we think about it very carefully, hey, there's a part of us that is changing, the body is changing, right? There's a part of us that actually is transcendental to space and time. So this whole idea of, oh, I was in the past, this is because that collective consciousness has a memory of all that. And we are experiencing that. And because we don't understand, we think, oh, maybe in the past life we were this. But actually, that information of being plugged in is there in that continuum. And as you go deeper, even that continuum disappears. It falls into a much more higher order substratum. So even this person that is there, actually, when you go deeper, even that identity disappears, right? And so the whole material identity completely is absorbed and becomes that one state. This is what samadhi state is in that ultimate form. So we see that, when we think through, so coming back to recapping, every material being has that finite consciousness, right? Because it's got a field of experience of the body which is limited. As we slowly retreat from the body, we start getting into our inner resources or our spiritual dimension, which is transcendental to the material apparatus. So it starts touching the core of that which has a wider frequency, wider field of experience. As we go deeper, we start touching that infinite state of existence where the body becomes transcendental. We become transcendental space and time. And ultimately, we see that when it becomes transcendental space and time, birth and death doesn't mean anything, right? So again, we see that the whole notion of, reincarnation is just a semantic of changing. But when the mind is caught up in the changing, it starts searching for what's birth and death. When the mind, touches the core of that eternal substratum in us, the mind stops searching for birth, death, reincarnation. It is that. Aham Brahmasmi. And this is what, through deep meditation, introspection, one experiences this. Why is this really important? So while we are traversing in this journey, there's a lot of changes. The mind realizes that this is part of the material world that is changing continuously, but there is a component in us that is changeless, which is the true reality. So we are riding this journey without being perturbed by the journey itself. We're powering this journey, we are experiencing this journey, but we are not. We know who we are, we experience it, that information is embedded into the continuum, and ultimately we see that, we transcend that experience, field of experience. And this is why we see that great saints and sages say that we live to outlive everything. And when we outlive everything, we ultimately attain that state of samadhi. So this is what, this whole idea of this model of reincarnation is to take you through what's changing, what's not changing, what is the mind anchored on. If the mind is anchored on material, personality and identity, the mind will then have that limitedness. If the mind anchors on a much more higher order, transcendental substratum, the mind is decoupled from this notion of birth and death and reincarnation. When one understands this, one learns to live their life in a transcendental way. One learns to ensure that the thoughts are universal and transcendental. When the mind is inspired by this transcendentality, thoughts become transcendental, the speech becomes transcendental, and ultimately their own actions and behavior, gives one that transcendentality. This is what we see that most scriptures, in this depth of that information, that's the essence. And in the depth of our meditation, we experience this. Sandosham.